Welcome to the webinar of the Israel-Canada Chamber of Commerce. We are glad to invite you to join us in this webinar and in our efforts to increase and enhance the business and trade relationship between Israel and Canada. Canada has been a friend of Israel since the inception of the State of Israel and even before that. But our trade and business relationship do not reflect the great potential of the business ability, technology-wise, and other businesses between the countries. So we are here to try and help increase those relationships. There are companies, Israeli companies, who do business in Canada in a great way, such as Elbit, such as Teva, who bought years ago Nova Farm, such as Iskar, and only recently, retail company by the name of Fox have purchased the franchise of Nike to all of Canada, and they already are doing their best to open tens of stores, of big stores in Canada. Vice versa, the other way around, Bombardier is doing a business of hundreds of millions of dollars in Israel. Azrieli now owns the largest chain of shopping malls in Israel. Superfarm is the largest company, now Israeli company, but originally from Canada, who is spread all over the country here in Israel. And we want to do a lot more. We want to increase the relationship to smaller companies, medium-sized companies, with the help of the Federation, the Jewish Federation of Greater Toronto, with the Ontario government and other government agencies all around Canada. And we have the Export Institute on our side to help us do this. And not to forget our counterpart, the Canada-Israel Chamber of Commerce, who will all together with us help Israeli businessmen who want to do business in Canada or to increase their businesses, and Canadian businesses who want to do business in Israel. I want to mention also the new agreement between Israel and the Emirates, which may also indirectly help business between Canada through the Emirates and Israel, as the Emirates treat Israel, hopefully justifiably, as a very good source of technology, while Canada is a partner or is a potential partner of Israel in its capacity as an empire in technology itself. We want to invite you to join our chamber, to join our efforts, which are all for free. And we want to thank Air Canada for offering to all members of our chamber a 10% discount on all flights between Israel and Canada and between Israel and the US via Canada. We hope that the coronavirus will disappear one day, and the flights between Israel and Canada will be as they were before, many of them. I'm proud to tell you that we have distinguished guests in our webinar. The keynote speaker is the governor of the Bank of Israel, Professor Amir Yaron, and we have others who will greet us or greet you before him. So I want to introduce the Premier of Ontario, Mr. Doug Ford.
I hope everyone had a safe and sweet Rosh Hashanah over the weekend. We have all come through many challenges this past year, but now is the time to look to the future. My friends, we're building a strong partnership between Ontario and Israel. That's why our government is committed to fighting hate crimes, including acts of anti-Semitism. In fact, MPP Gila Martow introduced and passed a successful motion in the Ontario legislature to reject the Boycott, Divest, Sanction movement. We're investing $1.6 million this year to create an anti-racism and anti-hate grant program. Programs that combat anti-Semitism are eligible for funding. In July, we also announced an investment of $1.7 million to support community-based programs to combat hate-motivated crimes. Our government will continue to get Ontario back on track with more opportunity and prosperity for Ontario and Israel businesses alike. I hope the new year brings you and your families health, peace, and prosperity. Shana Tova.
Adiv Baruch is a good friend of mine and the chairman of the Israel Export Institute, and I'm proud to introduce him to greet us.
Thank you, Yuda, for the warm introduction. Distinguished guests, honorable members, Mr. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, Canada. We have Professor Amir Yaron, the Governor of Bank of Israel. We have Galit Baram, the Consul General of Israel in Toronto and Western Canada. My dear friend, Advocate Yehuda Rave, the Chairman of the Israel-Canada Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. As Yehuda rightly mentioned, describing the current situation, that the COVID-19 has changed the world. You know, if I will tell you, Yehuda, that a month ago, we were in Canada with our president at the presidential tour, could you believe it? It's a year and a half that has passed by since we were in Canada, setting up additional milestone to continue developing the economic bridges between Canada and Israel. Time flies. But in 2020, COVID-19 has caught all of us unprepared, unready for those historical moments. But those historical moments who created constraints have also created new opportunities. And the new opportunities also arrived when we had the Abraham Peace Contracts, building additional economic relationship between the Emirates and Israel, which do create an amazing opportunity for the Canadian-Israel relationship to work in that region as well. We can speak about the economy and about Israel, but we'll have Professor Amir Yaron who will do it and elaborate on it. I do want to emphasize that during these times when the world has moved on steroids to the digital space, platforms like the Israeli Chamber of Commerce with the Israeli Export Institute are the trusted source of information to bring the business community together in times like that. That means that we have more work to do. We have more power in our hand because as a trusted source of information, we can do the proper matchmaking in a much more efficient way. During regular days, the business community will get on a plane, they will travel, they know each other, the Jewish community, within 2-3 notes, you will meet some people. You have the time for trial and error. But now, when the world trade is shrinking and the competition is becoming greater, you need more efficient platforms and tools in order to be able, as all of us, to maintain the warm leads and to create new leads and new relationship in order to grow the business. The bilateral trade between Canada and Israel is not even scraping the true potential that we have. We are a similar nation in research and development. We have a lot of commonalities, and therefore, I bless you, Yehuda, for everything that you have done, everything that you do, and everything that you will do, working together in order to promote the Canada-Israel economic relationship. I urge all of you members to continue to bring additional members, because the larger the community will grow, the more efficient the business will perform. So under this note, I want to wish all of you a happy holiday, Chag Sameach, and a happy new year, a healthy and prosperous new year. And I hope that the Canadian-Israel bilateral relationship will continue to grow, and we will do our utmost to help, to support, and to stand by you, Yuda, to make sure that you're fulfilling your dream. Thank you very much, and have a fruitful and productive event.
I now have the honor to introduce Professor Amir Yaron, the governor of the Bank of Israel, who will talk to us about the economy of Israel and the steps that the Bank of Israel has taken and is taking in light of the coronavirus. Professor Yaron, please.
Okay, I'm actually just exited a meeting about the corona situation. So first of all, welcome to everyone. I'll say a few words about the way I see the economic situation. As I told you, I just left a government meeting, so I might have to cut things a little bit short, depending if my turn would come. I'll start by saying to all my Canadian friends that I have a very warm heart since my son was a AAA hockey player. Hockey became a major part of my life, and I've spent many longing hours in Canada with this beautiful sport. So let me take a crack at telling you what I want to talk about, and that is partly about the current. I can't see the screen. Just a few. No. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the current economic situation, a little bit about the monetary policy that we've done here at the Bank of Israel, and a little bit about the stimulus plan. And if I get to it, I'll say a few words about Israel and Canada. And if not, you guys are welcome to basically to, I can deliver the slides. So Israel entered this coronavirus actually situation or crisis in a relatively good state. You could see on the top left. Those that are not on mute, please put on mute. So the growth rate, we've had a general growth rate of about 3%. Labor market at the bottom left was very tight, large participation rates, very low unemployment. That's the orange line at 3.2. Large surplus in the current account. And very importantly, we started out, and you could see on the top right corner, the debt to GDP of Israel went down over the last 13 or so years, progressively just below 60%, and gave us a very good starting point, like I mentioned. I mentioned Israel growth rate. These are the GDP growth rate in Israel. These are quarterly ones on an annual basis. What's interesting is perhaps the bank's current estimates, which you see here on the right-hand side. And we have here two scenarios. One in which these were done, by the way, about a month and a half ago. And back then, we were still, right now, as you know, we are in a second lockdown. But the green basically assumed that we will gradually get out of this crisis without any further lockdowns. And you could see it involved a shrinkage of 4.5% in 2020 and a sharp growth rate of 6.0. For those who these numbers don't really mean a whole lot, it still is a very major contraction. But the red bars that you see on the right-hand side, those were under the scenario that we are getting into what we call a more pessimistic scenario of several further increased morbidity issues, including a lockdown. And so we are clearly closer to the red line than the green line right now. We are currently revising our estimates. The truth of the matter is that some of the way in which the economic situation in Israel, the numbers that have come in towards the end of the summer show that actually the activity in the summer was better than we actually knew it was a month and a half ago. But as morbidity rates have grown, we are clearly closer to the red line. So these are the two scenarios. What's really important here are the broad unemployment rates, and these have gone up by at least several percentage points since the recent lockdown, purely because in our system, companies sent out their workers into a program that's called leave of absence. And the question is how permanent that situation might be as we go further. You could see the deficits there. I'll say something that down the road. You could see the debt to GDP ratio that we're talking about, where it gets dicey, not dicey, but gets more in a region that's much less comfortable, is obviously under the pessimistic, or what we call the low control scenario in 2021. I'll say something about the summer. You could see where the unemployment rate, the gray bar, is the overall unemployment rate. It includes regular unemployment, people who went to into leave of absence, and certain people that we know due to the corona have stopped searching in the labor market. You can see that we sort of plateaued around 12%, but over time, things have slightly improved towards the latter part of the summer. These are real GDP forecasts from OECD. You could see there the single hit versus the double hit scenario, which we are definitely closer to it right now. I think the big question is, which is exactly the meeting I came out from, what exactly, in what shape will the lockdown be and how long? There's pretty large scope of uncertainty, both about the morbidity and therefore about the type of lockdown that we see. This is something we developed here in the Bank of Israel, partly because macro variables come in large delays. These are real-time indicators. These are credit card spending. And since we settle these, we have day-to-day data. The red vertical dotted lines are points where more lockdowns or restrictions have been imposed. The green ones are where they've been uplifted. And the very right end, that's the more recent lockdowns. And you can see immediately how things, spending has gone down. And that is, that is part of the scarring of the economy. You could also see, if you see at the beginning, it's clear the type of spending that people spend money on is primarily food and pharmaceuticals, and afterwards, things go back to normal, so to speak, except perhaps tourism, et cetera, et cetera. But these things take time until they come back, whereas the food spending, people stock up, and that is part of what we see already during this period. So this is kind of the real side of the economy. We clearly have a contraction. I would say a contraction up to the second lockdown has been more favorable than other countries. It's hard to say given the contraction in the second quarter was minus 7.8 or 28% or 29% on an annual basis. It's still a lot lower than many of the European countries, than the U.S. But obviously, we are now in a second lockdown, and that has other ramifications going forward. Let me say a few things about monetary policy. The Bank of Israel, as opposed to the Bank of Canada, has two other hats. We are also the banking supervisors, and I personally also am the economic advisor to the government, something that puts you right in the middle of many of the fiscal discussions. So let me start with, so I kind of divided our actions into these three buckets. And I would say that at the beginning of the crisis, we observed something very unique. In many countries, when you see such a crisis, especially in the US, we have a flight to quality. People buy the US treasuries and their rates, now the price goes up, the rates goes down. In Israel, what we had was basically people sold off their mutual funds, and those mutual funds, so their immediate action was to sell government bonds. And moreover, Israeli institutional investment houses had many derivative losses in abroad, and they needed dollars. Those two things have led in mid-March, early March, two big effects. The Israeli bond market, the government bond market, basically froze and interest rates went up. And the FX market, the foreign exchange market, also was not functioning well. And if I'm looking at the left bucket, the first bullet and the third bullet, we supplied liquidity. We used our big, can be the elephant in the room in terms of FX reserves that we have, and we immediately basically reverted these markets and made them functionable. And those were the two first action items. And then not much after that, we asked ourselves, well, what does monetary policy in such a situation can do? Well, we have to remember, after all, this is a health crisis that translates into an economic crisis that could translate into a financial issue. We basically averted the financial situation, but as far as so most of the support supposed to come from a fiscal perspective, but from the bank's perspective, we acted very fast also to expand monetary policy and to lower interest rates and to make credit available. I like to, if I would use a metaphor, it's sort of like we were already in very low interest rate environment. Going into this, the Bank of Israel interest rate was 0.25. So if I would use a metaphor, you're like in an orchard, you want to make sure liquidity, no pun intended, liquidity goes everywhere. And basically at this type of situation, you actually have to walk to the endpoints of the orchard, make sure the pipes are open, et cetera, et cetera. And part of it was what we call quantitative easy program, where we purchased 50 billion government bonds. We committed to purchase 50 billion shekels of government bonds. Just to give you a perspective, that's 3 times the size of what was done here in 2008. And indeed, since then, the Israeli interest rates have been at roughly the 10-year government bond has been around 0.65, 0.7, and roughly like that of the US. And that's a very convenient interest rate environment for households, for businesses, and of course for the government to finance its increasing fiscal costs. We did reduce the Bank of Israel interest rate somewhat. but we also extended a new program where we provide subsidized loans to commercial banks, contingent on them showing us they provide credit to small and medium-sized enterprises. And then, so all of that was done very early on in March and April. Somewhat later, around two interest rate decisions, we actually went into acquisition of corporate bonds in a scale of about 15 billion shekels. Here, there was no dysfunctionality of that market, but the main idea was to be ahead of the curve by providing liquidity and making sure there's less uncertainty in that market. Indeed, since then, we've seen a lot of IPOs, a lot of debt issuance, and that basically provides more credit elsewhere. I'll go to the second bullet, which is one of the things you learn is there's a lot of issues. Should banking regulation be part of the central bank or not? It's different in different countries, as I mentioned. One thing you learn here is that in a crisis situation, it's very convenient and there's a lot of synergy between the banking side and the monetary policy. In continuing that metaphor of trying to provide credit, what we've done is we've adopted regulatory easings, for example, allowing the banks to defer payments without actually appointing the borrower as a let's say as a difficult or a borrower, in which case the bank would have to put aside some capital, and that allows, that facilitated right at the outset the banking system to allow a lot of deferrals. And until today, there's been deferrals on the order of 9 billion shekels. That's a big number. We also reduced the capital requirements and halted dividends, and that allowed, again, the banking system to provide a lot of credit. We've done a whole bunch of things that allowed business continuity of the banks, increased digitalization, and remote banking services. There was also one day here in which there was some kind of a run on ATMs, not run on banks. We made sure that those were filled in very fast fashion. I'll go to the third bucket, which is probably the most unique one for a governor of a bank, and that's the fiscal side. I would say here, while I've been an outspoken person prior to the crisis about the need of Israel to close down its structural deficit, which over the years grew to just about 4%, and that was a sort of an item through the several election cycles predating the crisis. Here, I think we have major contributions along three lines. First, in all the discussion of health versus economic, the Bank of Israel showed what are the implications of a lockdown, what are the implications of opening up malls or the schooling system. We also were part of a team that provided a lot of the economic issues related to the exit strategies out of the crisis. Some of our insights, unfortunately, were not taken. In particular, more policing and more restrictions. But I would say at the outset, the important thing was to change the point of view that there still is by some that in 2008 and various other military crises in Israel, the policy has been, let's wait till the end of the crisis and then see who needed the support, who needs to be compensated afterwards. And right at the outset of the crisis, relative to the discussion on let's focus on the structural deficit, here we said The government needs to spend fiscal spending here, needs to do it smart, not just waste money, but needs to support the economy because this is a very, very different crisis than the the global financial crisis of 2008. Basically, the chain of economic activity across different markets has been disconnected, and we need to find mechanisms to help and to bridge the economy through this crisis. Not only did we provide this kind of big picture and analysis, the bank was involved. The government has done several fiscal, we call it fiscal boxes because they're kind of outside of the regular budget, which I'll speak about. I'll say something about that. But the first one was 80 billion shekels, the second one was 20, and now there was another one. In each one of them, we were involved in many, many of the steps of trying to outline how to help businesses with their fixed costs, how to help the unemployed, and various items like that. Naturally, fiscal policy takes more time than monetary policy. It takes time to implement, and there are several criticisms about how long the magnitude and how long it took to do that. But over time, now there's been another several rounds of these boxes, and some of the delivery has also, in terms of time to deliver, has improved. I think due to time, I will basically skip these slides, which basically show you what happened. This is what happened in the shekel. Basically, there's lots of need for U.S. dollars. The blue line is the Israeli line, which shows you at this location. But this also happened between the euro and the dollar, which is probably the biggest FX market. I'll skip this. I'll just say this is the big spike in interest rate that I mentioned in early March, and subsequent to our basically intervention or QE, you could see where interest rates have settled. This is also true in the corporate bond market, where you could see the rates have been more have been lowered, and that facilitates more credit throughout there. This is a table that describes that the deferrals that I mentioned have been very large, about 700 and over 700 requests, 700,000, and over 9 billion shekels. You could also see that interest rates, there's been a lot of discussion whether interest rates by the banks have been, they've overcharged. You could see that basically they are flat throughout this period. I'll say something about the stimulus plan. I'm just running through time. You could see that these are large numbers. By public consumption, we mean money that's gone towards the health sector, plus infrastructure, grants to the unemployed, to businesses, and financing. These are government guaranteed loans. And you could, so this is the total number for 2020. You could see the execution is still, not all of it, to say the least, has been utilized. And as I mentioned, that has been in the news. These are the government guarantee loans. I would say this program has been extended now. This 18 billion shekels has just been doubled. This is part of our suggestion. This is part of the action that has been done in the last 2 weeks going into the second lockdown. The big issue is whether companies that are facing such a huge uncertainty going into the second lockdown with the demand to borrow. If you are a restaurant, if you are in the tourism business, or even a medium-sized company, do you want to take out a loan at this point, given that it's quite uncertain what will happen down the road? I'll say two things. When you look at our stimulus program, in the orange line, you see the indirect support, and that's the loans. We're not, as obviously you could see some countries on the left are much bigger. In terms of the blue bars, those are the direct support. We're definitely, we're not the highest, but we're definitely not the smallest here. Let me say something of where are we going to be. These are forecasts. We're not too far from the Bank of Israel's forecast or the IMF, and they relate to June. Things will likely deteriorate. But you could see that if you look at our debt growth for basically, this is the bottom. This is here at the bottom. You could see that the orange line gives you how much debt we've accumulated. Remember, I said we started with a strategic point of 60%, and we're likely going to end up at 75 according to their estimate. You know, these are going to deteriorate somewhat, but you could see in terms of the actual growth of the debt to GDP, we're in a common region by many countries. As I mentioned, we started out with a deficit that was slightly higher, and you could see that right here, that in terms of the increase in debt, which is the orange line, we're comparable, as even though there's a lot of talk about our increased debt, it is not very far from many other countries. Again, and even our estimated ending point of deficit, this is the increase in deficit, this is the where the deficit is going to be at the end of 2020. You could see that we are not very far from many countries, but I think where the lockdown will be and what we will do, we still need to determine that. I'll end with a slide that I use, which I normally don't use in the context of the Corona crisis, but I would say we're facing, Israel is facing also a productivity challenge going forward. When I'm talking about a 20-year challenge, this is making sure that other parts of we have the high-tech sector, which perhaps many of you know, and is definitely a thriving sector. And in fact, I believe that given our high exposure to these sectors, once we come out of the Corona crisis, relative to economies who are, let's say, are based on old economy type of industries, we would be less vulnerable, and the dynamic economy that we know will come back in that respect. Having said that, Israel has several long-term challenges, which are on the left-hand side of the graph, and that is increasing our human capital, improving our schools. Our schools have, over the years, we see deteriorations in schooling outcomes and in various tests. We also need to improve infrastructures. Any one of you who visited Israel and have driven here during traffic times or even non-traffic time, it's very busy on the roads, and we need to improve that. And finally, our government sector needs to adopt, to be more agile, to reduce bureaucracy, improve digital processes. All these elements, we have a whole set of documents, and these are investments that needs to be done in order for us to be in a better productivity situation 10, 15, 20 years from now, so Israel can continue to grow at a fast rate. It involves bringing various segments into the working force, female in the Arab sectors, other sectors that needs to improve their human capital. in the short run, which is the 2020-21, we need to bring in some of these longer term issues immediately, as much as we can, into a 2021 budget that will provide the framework and will towards these items. We will, and moreover, will alleviate some of the uncertainty, economic uncertainty, both for the government agencies and for those who work with the government agencies, and that will itself help as you exit out of the corona crisis. There's a few slides here about the relationship with Canada. Where obviously, here I'm just speaking about the economic situation, and you could see that in general we have relatively large scope of trade. The balance of trade is that on average we export more than we import. Just due to time, I'll say that we can deliver those slides to the members if they want to. You could see the major industries that we are at. Obviously, I won't talk about the exchange rate. I will say that we see tourism is growing over time. Obviously, 2020 is a lost year in terms of tourism. We all hope that maybe in the second half of 2021 things change back, and obviously that's an important aspect for us and for the continuing relationship, both business and non-business. I guess I'll say a few words. I think the recovery. I think Israel is right now going into is in a lockdown. We are debating how long this will last. This is not an easy question. We are bringing in the economic implication of these lockdowns. I think one of the challenges, not just in Israel but everywhere, is how to do these recovery scenarios. And we see in Europe there's also there's a resurgence of morbidity. So I'm not sure Israel, while we've made mistakes, and there's basically issues with large gatherings that have really prevented us from lowering the rate of morbidity. We are seeing initial signs of a decline in these things, but it's too early to make a call. But I think these types of issues are likely to show up in many other countries. I think as I'm thinking more generally outside of Israel, as an economist, there's going to be an issue of people naturally save more, and how to move these savings into consumptions and into what we call capex investments. There's obviously, as this event is taking longer, in the I've coined the language that instead of a V-shaped crisis and recovery, we are now more like in a Nike logo event where it's a deep down and it's going to be a prolonged comeback. And the question is, what are the implications for financial markets turbulence? And one, obviously, as supervisors, you always the banking sector in Israel is very stable, had a very good portfolio, entered the crisis in a very good situation, is in a good situation, faces various stress tests very well, but nonetheless, the question beyond that is just as this crisis lingers, what effects it has on various businesses. We know the crisis is not affecting everyone evenly. Small businesses are taking the brunt of it. Lower income workers are taking the brunt of it. There's also going to be major labor market functioning issues. We have many unemployed. How many will be reemployed? And there's going to be massive reallocation. Certain jobs are not going to be there down the road. I talked a little bit about the fiscal support. There is a large deficit and increased debt. And I think many countries will face this. Israel is also facing this, but the markets right now understand that we're doing it as part of dealing with the crisis. And as long as it is, as long as it is targeted towards that, and as long as we are able to also do the budget for 2021, the markets will understand the actions more favorably. I think I will stop here, and I wish you and everyone who's listening obviously good health and keep safe.
Thank you so much, Professor Yaron, for agreeing to talk to us and to tell us how Bank of Israel will now help the State of Israel to overcome this economic situation, which is very troublesome, like in other parts of the world. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Leonard Abramsky, the head of First Capital Realty Company and the co-chairman of the campaign of the Jewish Federation of Greater Toronto. I appreciate very much the support of the Federation of Toronto, Greater Toronto to Israel. To those who don't know, the Jewish Federation of Toronto is one of the warmest Jewish communities in the world, and they support Israel in so many ways, both in terms of donations and in terms of helping business relationship. And we hope very much that they will do their job in supporting Israeli businesses that we refer to Canada, and also referring Canadian businesses who want to do business in Israel. Mr. Abramsky, please.
Good morning, everyone in Toronto, and good evening, everyone in Israel. My name is Leonard Abramsky, and I am one of two co-chairs for UJA Federation of Greater Toronto's 2020 annual campaign. For those of you who don't know what UJA is, here is a brief overview. UJA of Greater Toronto is part of Jewish Federations of North America, which represents 146 Jewish federations and over 300 communities in Canada and the United States. UJA Toronto's mission is to preserve and strengthen the quality of Jewish life in Greater Toronto, Canada, Israel, and around the world through philanthropic, volunteer, and professional leadership. The power of Toronto's Jewish community lies in its commitment to core Jewish values, including our deep commitment to Israel and our dedication to Tikkun Olam, serving the most vulnerable in our community. This dedication has become even more apparent this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. UJA mobilized quickly to help those hit hardest, including isolated seniors, Holocaust survivors, and people with disabilities. We launched the Emergency Campaign for Community Resilience in the spring in order to meet the needs of our most vulnerable community members. This included assistance with food relief, financial aid, mental health counseling, and employment services. This campaign has been incredibly successful, with 7,925 community members donating over $64.4 million as of yesterday. All of us at UJA have been in complete awe of the generosity of Toronto's Jewish community. We've made incredible progress, including delivering more than 25,000 community members support through our network of social services, over 50,000 kosher meals on wheels delivered, and over 1,700 volunteers engaged to help with food delivery and wellness phone calls. As we prepare for the second surge of requests for help from vulnerable community members who have just been getting by until now, we will continue to need the community's support. Our projection for the needs of Toronto's Jewish community indicate that we will require still an additional $21 million in order to aid the vulnerable and preserve the essentials of Jewish life in our local community. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are grateful to have the insights of such an impressive group of speakers, and UJA of Greater Toronto is proud to be a part of this important discussion on trade relations. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Shalom Chavirim. Hello friends. The coronavirus pandemic influences every aspect of our lives these days. We Israeli diplomats in Canada see it reflected in our work, and the challenges that we're facing are many. But every crisis is also an opportunity for growth and for change. The need to maintain physical distance and the restrictions on international travel have led to a growing number of webinars, of Zoom meetings and online presentations. Luckily, modern technology builds a bridge across the ocean and creates an opportunity to hear from Israel's most prestigious speakers. Professor Amir Yaron, the governor of the Bank of Israel, is one of them. We at the Consulate General of Israel in Toronto and Western Canada are thankful for the excellent relations we have with Canadian partners. I would like to particularly mention the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, and Ontario Minister of Economic Development, Vic Fedeli, for their strong support of our bilateral economic ties. Israeli diplomats in Canada watch with pride the growing interest in Israel, our little startup nation. Before the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, we assisted missions and business delegations on their way to Israel. They were led by premiers, by ministers, by mayors, and business leaders who were genuinely interested in Israeli high-tech and innovation, in cyber, in biomed, fintech, and AI, just to name a few. Hopefully, this activity will be renewed soon. With the updated Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement and the close ties between our countries, there is great potential for more cooperation. I would like to thank the Israel-Canada Chamber of Commerce, Israel Export Institute, the UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, and Bombardier for this initiative. And in the spirit of the Jewish New Year, I wish you all success, happiness, prosperity, and above all, good health. Shana Tova. Chag Sukkot Sameach.
Hello everyone, my name is Stanley Gomes and I'm the Senior Trade Commissioner at the Canadian Embassy here in Israel. Canada and Israel have a long history of friendship, especially in the area of trade, with our initial free trade agreement being signed in 1997. That is almost 20 years ago. Here at the Embassy we have focused on three main priorities. The first priority being the implementation of the free trade agreement. I'm very pleased to report as of September this year, the newly signed SIFTA has been in effect for 1 year. When people think of free trade agreements, they usually think of tariffs, when in reality, behind these agreements are many elements that make the flow of goods and services easier on SMEs in order to reduce costs and save time. The second priority is the strengthening of the bilateral science cooperation agreement between our two countries. The agreement, called SERDIF, was initially signed in 1994 and should give you an idea of the importance our two countries have placed in the area of science and innovation. We have spent the better part of this year working on improving this agreement, and we have made great progress in this area. The third priority being international trade. We are seeing a keen interest from Canadian and Israeli companies in specific sectors, primarily in autonomous vehicle, IoT and sensor technologies, in the area of life science, specifically focused on aging, brain health, and telemedicine, and in the areas of big data and AI. 2020 was shaping up to be one of the most busiest years for us at the Embassy. Unfortunately, COVID put our plans on hold. However, I'm quite confident, given our strong people-to-people relationship and the amount of time we have spent putting in key trade infrastructure like the Free Trade Agreement and the Science and Technology Agreement, that we will get back to where we were before. Here at the Embassy, we are committed to this relationship and to improving trade between our two countries. Thank you.
I want to introduce the General Manager of Israel of Bombardier, Eran Cohen, As you may know, Bombardier is one of the largest companies in the world in their field, and Bombardier Transportation is doing business in Israel in a very large way. And Eran is managing this business here in Israel, and we want to learn from him what he thinks about our business here. Thank you very much. Eran, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody wherever you are. My name is Eran, as mentioned by Yuda. Thank you, Yuda. I'm managing the Bombardier Transportation Israel. And I would like to talk with you a little bit today about the mobility solutions and how this could be a stimulators to the economy. And I really like the sentence made by Professor Yaron Amir, how not to waste a good crisis, and the link that our industry on the solution that could be stimulating the economy on the day after. So I will start with showing the presentation, telling a little bit about who is Bombardier Transportation, what are we doing in Israel, and talk a little bit about the mobility solutions. 1 second. Okay. So first of all, who are we? Bombardier is a strategic rail technology partner to cities and countries around the world. The theme is that we help people move, and you can see from the facts and figures that we are showing here, we are partnered to over 200 cities around the world. We are moving 500 million passengers a day. That's pre-corona, of course. We are moving them over 70,000 of trucks in the world, in more than 100,000 trains. We have engineering sites in the 61 engineering sites in 27 countries, about 35,000 employees of 119 nationalities, a truly multinational company. I think in Israel, one of the success stories of Bombardier is written in Israel. In more than 2 decades of commitment to this country, we were fortunate and are fortunate still to contribute to Israel's growth by delivering hundreds of trains and electric locomotives, and actually being Israel Railways a partner of choice in the, I would say, national electrification program, which is taking over the last years. In fact, our trains, electric locomotives and double decks are the first one to travel on the newly Tel Aviv-Jerusalem line. We are particularly proud of our last 10 years investment back in the country, where we have invested more than 150 million euro in local industry, developing local industries. And in fact, we are the only, so far, train builder who has local production sites for heavy trains. And we are employing tens of employees in the south part and north part of Israel, training them, developing rail systems and expertise. As I mentioned, we are located in 3 sites. When I was joining Bombardier in 2007, we were about 3 employees in 1 site, an office in Ramat Gan. And I'm very proud that today, after almost 14 years, we are more than 130 employees in 3 different sites around Israel. So Professor Yaron talked about the Israeli economies and the policies under the COVID-19 crisis. And I believe that Israel's focus and acceleration of infrastructure and railway projects are now required more than ever to stimulate the economy, and as we said, not to waste a good crisis for that. Let's remember for a second what are the top benefits of public transportation and investment in infrastructure in normal days and, of course, also in crisis days. So first of all, investment in infrastructure and rails equals economic growth. It saves energy. It reduces pollution. In fact, as you can see, the rail contribution pollution, CO2 pollution, is only 1.6% versus 26.4% of the road. Of course, railway and mobility creates movement of production capacities, people and goods. It reduces the road congestions and accidents. It balances the urbanization by bringing their geographic and social periphery closer to the centers. It enables economic benefits to the economy. Just to name a few, residential property was an average of 42% more valuable if located near a high-frequency transit service, which means that cities reap greater tax revenues. Furthermore, we can see transit agencies and organizations employ many people and create many times more private sector jobs. It also provides health benefits to the community. A study done by the city of Copenhagen linked a healthier lifestyle with a lower mortality rate, happier disposition, and more productivity at work. And finally, it makes an efficient use of our limited land resources, especially in Tel Aviv and other metropolitan. What is the situation today in Israel? It was mentioned also by Professor Yaron Amir. So everybody recognizes that in Israel, we are in fact in a mobility crisis. Today, congestions estimate to cost our economy 40 billion of productivity a year. And it's estimated to be increased to 70 billion in 2030. So what does the city of the future look like? The city of the future will be shaped by mobility. Mobility is when you think of it, is more than a human issue than a technical issue, because we are constantly moving and will continue to move to do so after the COVID crisis. This is our human nature, to discover, to explore, and to go beyond. And mobility is the heart of the development, from population growth to urbanization, connectivity, and environment. So what do we think we need to do today? It's at this time more than ever. So we believe, as always, that rail is the solution for today mobility issues more than ever. Infrastructure development equals economic growth, and mobility is a key economic driver. The crisis, of course, will be over, and with it, the demand for mobility solution in the cities, between the cities, to and from the airport, all this will be increased. The top 600 urban centers generate more than 60% of the world's GDP, and those cities need to be smart. They need to provide working and living space for millions of people in more efficient way. So what do we do? How do we think we need to make the mobility solution more accessible and more appealing to the passenger? So first of all, we need to address the passenger expectation. And what is the normal passenger expect? It expects to have available and safe mobility solution, frequent and accessible. Heavy rail should be every 5 minutes available. Metro should be every 2, 3, 5 minutes. Light rail every 5 minutes. And the proximity to the destination should be not more than 400 meters. It has to be reliable. You need to know that when you go to the station, you will have on-time, accurate service, and you will stay connected to your digital environment, social media, etc. And most important, I think also, it has to be desired. It has to be affordable, efficient, economically friendly, secured, and comfortable service. That those are the added value that will make the mobility public transport selection of choice. So just to conclude, what we need to change today in order to do it better. So first of all, and let's use the time today when we have, let's say, a slowdown in the economy and less traffic on the roads. So first of all, we need to advance the planning reforms by prioritizing the infrastructure projects. For instance, the metro law. To reduce bureaucracy barriers, we need to recognize that transportation is in a state of emergency and to accelerate the implementation of investments. We need to incentivize public transport usage over our private cars, metropolitan levies, for instance. We need also to learn from other experience in other cities around the world, mistakes, lesson learned, best practices. We need also to neutralize political pressure groups like leasing companies, fuel companies, and car lobbying. Finally, I think the vision is that we need to tailor a rail system to each individual city and region that considers geography, cultural implication, and specific technical requirements. Rail solutions are needed all along the value chain, whether it is a light rail vehicle, metro, heavy rail, high-speed rail, and so forth. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, I want to thank Kobe Seat, our General Manager of our Chamber of Commerce, and Ilanit Muchnik, who have taken care of all the preparations, not simple ones, in order to be able to present this webinar. I invite all of you to visit our website and join us in our efforts to help the business relationship. As we said before, every one of you is invited to tell us, if he's Canadian, what kind of business he wants to do in Israel, and if Israeli, what kind of business he wants to do in Canada. And we promise to do our best, free of charge, to everybody in order to try and help him do his business. Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Hopefully we will overcome the coronavirus, and we'll see you again soon in business and in pleasure. Thank you very much.